Well, Michael, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you on here. I'm really intrigued by some of the things you're doing. So why don't you give the audience a little background on where you've been, who you are, what you're doing?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Michael Brody-Waite, and I believe that great leaders live like drug addicts. And I formed that hypothesis as a recovering addict that got clean without a college degree, having no formal training and working his way up the corporate ladder and founding an Inc. 500 company, leading a nonprofit, and now teaching people how to live and lead mask free. I have a book coming out that takes everything that I've learned in merging two worlds, leadership and what recovering addicts do to recover. And that book is titled Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts: How to Lead Like Your Life Depends on It. And it is available at all the major outlets for pre-order currently, and it comes out May 5th. And you can also go to michaelbrodywaite.com, BRODY hyphen WAITE.com. And really, my entire philosophy can be summarized in what this book represents, because I'm not the first person to talk about leadership. I'm not the first drug addict that's in recovery to tell a story, but I am doing that hasn't been done before, where I'm taking everything that addicts have been doing to recover for the last 80 years, millions of addicts in 12-step programs, and directly turning it into a leadership philosophy and framework that can empower anyone to become a great leader.
Wow, I love it. I love it. So talk to me about this mask-free piece of the puzzle here, because I don't think we're living kind of in an environment today that encourages mask-free.
I totally agree. The leadership paradigm that we inherited is one of command and control, and it comes from a world where we had centralized decision making. We were building products and manufacturing in a conveyor belt somewhere. We were at war, and so those that were in charge couldn't admit that they didn't know what they were doing at times, or that they had fears, or that they had insecurities, or God forbid they were wrong. And they thought that the strength would command their troops. And that was true. But about 25 years ago, our entire world changed and we stopped connecting with each other thanks to mobile phones and social media. And also, about the same time, we transitioned from a manufacturing economy to a services economy. So, at the same time that connection's at an all time low, connection becomes 10 times more important in commerce, and we're left completely ill equipped because people don't connect with masks that pretend that they're not human. The people that we connect the most with are the people that demonstrate their humanity, invite us into their journey, and let us walk with them. And most importantly, they lead themselves through the hard times and the fears and the insecurities. And as a result, just by walking with them, we learn how to lead even better ourselves. And we don't need them to teach us how to lead. We get to actually lead just by watching what they do. And the place that I learned that was in 12-step programs, because a sponsor is a very different type of leader than a CEO.
So talk to me about that a little bit. How is a sponsor different from a CEO? I've had some friends that are in recovery. Real excited. I got at least one client that's been 11 years sober. Love working with the people. I mean, they're, love the people through and through. It's been great. But how is that different?
So my first sponsor's name was Chuck. And I remember he told me very early on, he said, look, I'm not an expert. I've been doing this for 15 years. And yes, your life depends on what we're doing, but I'm not an expert. All I can do is share my experience and guide you in working the steps. And so to me, that's maybe an approach that a leader would take, but here's where the rubber meets the road. He told me, no matter what, do not put me on a pedestal because I will fall right the heck off. I'm just an addict like you. And then what he would do is, when he would be experiencing fear or going through challenges, he didn't wait for me to discover it. He would proactively bring it to me and say, here, this is what I'm struggling with, and here's how I'm going to apply the steps to it. And sometimes he would be horribly wrong and fail. And I would get to walk through that with him. And so for me, one of the biggest lines of delineation is, when we become, I've been, CEO 3 times, and when we become a CEO, we have this pressure to know it all and to have all the answers and to be stronger and all that kind of stuff. And then we try to relate to our people and we say, oh, I struggled once back in 84. That was really a hard time or whatever.
Yeah,
But
when I
like,
was
as
born.
leaders, we don't come to our team and say, I'm in the middle of the crap right now. I have no idea how the story ends, but walk with me and let's watch what we do. And that's what a sponsor does. And they inspire through their experience rather than through their expertise or their position.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that. I mean, you gain strength by being weak. You gain safety by being vulnerable.
Yep.
And I think it would be very few. I mean, it's very rare that you hear that in a work environment where the boss is willing to get all the data, get all the team together, and then it's his or her call,
Right.
and willing to say, for me, it's still unclear. And, you three think this and you three think the opposite. And, you two don't know. And I'm kind of I don't know, but we have to act. We have to do something. So is that part of it too with your sponsor or with what you want CEOs to do? That you also have to decide when that time is that you have to act, even if you're not sure. But by being open, you have the ability to move forward down a route, maybe not jumping in with both feet, but you kind of do like a lean startup type of thing. You're going to go in a direction a certain amount that won't kill you if you're wrong, but you're going to say, okay, let's go down this route, let's see what it looks like, and get to this stage and then go to the next. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely in the ballpark. I think that at the end of the day, I care more about, I don't care as much about that call. I mean, in that example, whether you get it right or wrong, I care about how you lead yourself and how you teach people to lead in that moment. And so for me, mask-free living and mask-free leadership in my book, it's really me taking everything I learned in a 12-step program and arguing that we are addicted to masks in this world. We are addicted to them. The reason that we have so much leadership, thought leaders that are talking about authenticity, and they tell us why it's important and what it is, but nobody's doing it. Our elected officials, our politicians that are elected to represent us, have never answered a question with "I don't know," and yet I don't know a ton of stuff. And I know that everybody I talk to doesn't know a ton of stuff. So they aren't willing to actually represent their humanity. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, leading yourself is representing who you truly are. And when you represent who you truly are, you gain a tremendous power to channel your unique potential and to really be able to grow as a person, as a leader. And so when it comes to specific decision making, I'll give you a really concrete example. When I was the CEO of my startup, we got a bunch of press really quick, and we were in an attic, like a garage basically, except on top of a house. And I was CEO, and I had no idea how to lead the company, but I knew that if I did the wrong things with all that exposure, it was going to kill us. And I had in my email signature CEO, but I knew I was like a little kid in a suit. And so I didn't want to tell my team that I didn't know what I was doing, especially as it related to the exposure from the press. But instead of trying to pretend like I did, I went to my team. I practiced what I learned in recovery as opposed to leadership. And I said, guys, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to be a CEO, and I need to do something about this. Do you have any thoughts? And they actually rallied around me, helped me find a mentor, and then I started working with that mentor to scale myself up as a CEO. And in the process, I shared with them all of the checkpoints where I exceeded my ability to be an idiot just by this much, because someone taught me something that made me a better CEO. But I also shared all the times that I fell short. And as a result, that inspired them to never hide when they didn't know something or when they needed to grow. We didn't have to waste 7 meetings dancing around a topic or whatever. They would get straight to it. And then I got to hold them accountable to scaling themselves because I had done the same thing so proactively and so vulnerably right in front of them. And I would literally go to them on a weekly basis and declare my growth edge and say, if I couldn't grow, I would fire myself. And that was the way that I held myself accountable. But at the same time, if I was willing to do that, it was inexcusable if you tried to hide your weaknesses. And as a small company, we have to grow, we have to scale, we have to look at our growth edges as the opportunity to scale. We need to do something about it. And trying to lie and hide around that kind of stuff is just like what a drug addict does when they want to keep using drugs.
So tell me two things. It wasn't the original question I wanted to ask, but tell me two things. I want to hear more about growth edges. And I also want to hear about if you're saying on a weekly basis, you're looking at your growth edge and you're saying, if I can't grow, it sounds like you're saying, if I can't grow on a weekly basis, then I shouldn't be CEO. How do you measure that? So, what is a growth
Oh,
edge and what were you
yeah.
measuring as you went week by week or month by month, whatever?
So those are great questions. So I didn't mean that I would fire myself on a weekly basis. It's that on a weekly basis, I would be assessing what my growth edge it was, and it might take months to address or years in some cases. And I would just say that I was being hyper vigilant about whatever my growth edges were. And I was always aware of what my limitations were and what I needed to do to work on them. And so some of those things might be I need to get better at this in a year, and I'm going to do the work. But in my book, I have a system that systematically walks through for people how to identify their masks, take them that are holding them back, take them off, and apply my three principles to become their unique self and to be able to unleash their potential. And what we distill everything down to is what we call the mask free minute. And it's a small hack that is essentially leveraging the best of what a 12-step program has to offer and what psychologists have talked about for years, that awareness in and of itself is all you need to create automatic growth. And so we have a thing that we have everybody do for 1 minute where they look at their growth edge. And so usually what happens is when you're looking at one growth edge, unfortunately, three others appear. And so what that like, so for me right now, my growth edge is I'm wearing the mask of holding back my unique perspective. I'm scared to death to talk about what's in my book. I'm scared to share my message with the world because I'm scared that people won't like it and they won't value it. And so I find myself hedging when I'm doing PR. I find myself hedging with my team. I find myself holding back my unique perspective all the time. So I've got every minute for 1 minute every day, I'm going through a set of questions that ask me if I basically held back my unique perspective. And I just get to be aware of whether I did or not. I don't have to solve the problem. But by doing that, I'm essentially taking some of the best tools that are in the 12-step program and implementing them into an awareness hack that allows me to create automatic growth as a CEO.
So it's really interesting. So first of all, very consistent with some other leaders that we speak with and what we also teach is that if you really want to be on the top of your game, you need to have that weekly check-in. And you're saying, looking at your growth edge. I first learned that 35 years ago or whatever when I read Lee Iacocca's book about turning around Chrysler Corporation called Iacocca. And I only remember two things. One was he always, Sunday night, removed himself from the family, went in his study, and for 2 hours, basically reviewed past, present, future. So past, did I do the things last week I had to do to save this company? What's in front of me now? What do I need to do this upcoming week? And it sounds like you're doing the same thing in this growth edge. You're really holding yourself accountable, although, it's not turning on a light bulb. Maybe some of these things you're not going to happen in a week, right?
Right.
Okay. But what strikes me that's very interesting is that um, you're struggling worried about some rejection. Did I
Yeah,
hear you
absolutely.
correctly?
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. So, how many composers or painters, if you look back hundreds of years, were not recognized during their day for their greatness? And it was whether it was a year after they passed away or 100 years or whatever. Now they're like, oh, they were the best ever.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
totally.
So come
Totally.
on. I mean, you have a message. Yeah, and we're just scratching the surface here. I haven't even gotten. I want to hear what the three things are. Well, actually, I know what the three things are because I watched your TED talk. But I want to hear these three things. But come on. I mean, I just want to encourage you. You need to go out and speak with all your passion. You need to give everything you got. Whether if they don't get it, well, that's too bad. They'll catch it maybe the second time around, third time around, but you'll connect with those people that are more receptive. What did Simon Sinek was quoting some survey where 10% of the audience is like they're going to get it. They're
Right.
going to go with you.
Right.
Speak to the 10%. Don't worry about it.
No, I appreciate that. I think we live in information overload. And so I think that we have a tendency as human beings to want like really simple answers. And I think unfortunately the truth is a little bit more gray. And so like people will go out there and say, don't worry what other people think. They're like, I don't worry what other people think. And that is absolute crap. That, like, we have a survival mechanism that makes us worry. It's not about, don't have that fear. That's like even worse. That's like shaming me for having fear. That makes me feel even worse. It's and I'm sure you know this too, because you've done speaking. For me as a public speaker, I've done 1,000 speeches. I still get nervous, and it's learning to be comfortable with discomfort, and being able to execute to your true self through that discomfort. And so, like, I've got the dichotomy to some degree of, I feel like scared that my unique perspective will be rejected. And at the same time, I'm 100% convinced that it is the future of leadership. And I have to reconcile these two worlds on a daily basis. But what I find is that most people respond to one or the other. And it's very hard for them to accept the integration of the two, that both
Yeah.
can coexist. Like, my wife is like, you have to believe in this 100%. I'm like, well, I didn't believe 100% in my recovery. I didn't believe 100% in my career at Dell. I didn't believe 100% in my startup. I don't believe in 100% when I was running a nonprofit. And it's worked out really well for me because I was able to acknowledge that I didn't have 100% confidence. But I appreciate your encouragement. I think, for anybody listening, it's possible to manage both at the same time. And I think what you pointed to is what matters most is not how you think, but it's how you act. And can you act as if?
Well, and I would add to that and say two things. One is, first of all, I agree with you that the fear is healthy. It's how you respond instead of react
Yes.
to it. And obviously, you developed that capability. Um, and the second point I was going to make, I think I've forgotten, so that's not going to help us. But it's too bad because it was really the better one. Um, but it's I think. Oh yes, now I remember what it was. So here's the thing: is that when you bring your message out, as you've already indicated, the reason you're going to resonate with more people is because of the authenticity piece. That people are going to sense pretty. Everybody's got their BS filter, right?
Yep.
Where, and particularly these days, I mean, skeptical, quick to judge. Some people are just super nasty, but let's forget them. But the super judgment. So when you come in, you're going to be authentic. You're going to gain some credibility pretty fast. And I think that gives you, they're going to listen a little bit longer and they're going to wait a little bit more for what you've got. And I'm wondering, maybe now's a good time for you to share these three things you're bringing from recovery to what you've got from for CEOs.
Yeah. So when I went to rehab, I've been wearing masks my whole life. I've been hiding who I truly was to get what I wanted. And that's where addicts and leaders have a lot in common. They hide parts of their true selves to get what they want. Just addicts want to get high and leaders want to be successful. Slightly different. The pay as a CEO is a lot better than being an addict, in case anybody's wondering. So definitely apply for that job. But when I checked into rehab, I'd been kicked out of college, kicked out of my house. My car had been repossessed. I'd been fired from my job. I was throwing up blood. I was at the end of the line, and they told me that I had to throw out all my masks if I was going to live. And they gave me a way of living that I've thus interpreted into three principles. And the first principle is practice rigorous authenticity. The second one is surrender the outcome. And the third one is do uncomfortable work. And I believe in modern day leadership, we are taught to do the opposite.
So I want to ask you about something because you're saying there's a correlation between addicts and CEOs,
Yep.
and I totally agree with you. And part of it is that all of us, but particularly CEOs, because it impacts so many people, are addicted to some bad habits.
Yep.
Now, my understanding is that most addicts reach a point where they say, "Okay, I'm done. I'm going this way," and there's a turning point where you commit, "Okay, I'm not doing it anymore." Now, what's been
Right.
interesting to me is I've talked to some addicts. That point didn't occur when they first checked in to rehab.
Right.
Like I talked to one, it was 90 days later.
Yep.
Okay, where was your point where you were like, "No, I'm doing this differently"?
I was really fortunate. Unfortunately, most of us don't get clean or sober and stay clean or sober. I mean, just the majority of us don't. Those are the
Yeah.
hard facts. And so I was very fortunate in that I got in there and I was so desperate. They say, my bottom isn't that different than all the other stories you hear, like good or bad. But our saying in recovery is your bottom is when you stop digging. You get to choose. And I was spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically bankrupt. And I was willing to find another way to live. And I personally really appreciate when someone creates a system that gives me a new way to live. And that was the first time anyone had given me the instructions for how to live life on life's terms. So I saw it as more than stop doing the drugs and more as find a new way to live. And I was really fortunate that it stuck for me. And I'll tell you that um, this is the same thing I think with mask addiction. It's not about how bad do you want it. It's about whether you're willing to do the things that it takes to get it. And it's not the big one novel thing like you go to rehab and you're good. It's the daily thing. It's the weekly thing. It's the monthly thing. And so, I've gone over 2000 12-step meetings, and, they're not novel anymore, but they are what wire my muscles to behavior in a certain way and react to circumstances in a certain way that gives me a competitive advantage as a leader and allows me to recover as an addict.
Yeah, and I think it really works well in your analogy of CEOs or leaders are like addicts, and that they have to want to develop a new, more powerful habit to overcome the old toxic ones that they've got. Now, let's slow it down. Let's walk through each of these three things. So give us the first one first. Let's have a little dialogue about that.
Sure. So practice rigorous authenticity. So authenticity is a buzzword. Everybody can remember that one moment where they kept it real back in like the 80s or whenever it was. But rigorous authenticity means being true to yourself in word and action, no matter the cost, no matter who you're with, no matter the stakes. I don't care if the customer's in the room. I don't care if the boss is in the room, the spouse is in the room. It means I don't care if you're on a podcast and Manage to Win podcast. You have to be true to yourself in word and action. You see every moment as the opportunity to practice that muscle, as opposed to the one moment out of 1,000 where you chose to take off the mask.
So, if you'll forgive me, would you please share that story of when you were the software company and you had your software failed on one patient?
Yeah. So short version is I'd maxed out my credit card, drained my savings, withdrew from my 401k, bet everything on a company that I co-founded in 2010 with the mission to reinvent access to healthcare. We built a piece of software. We started getting going. I had a bunch of employees, but we were running out of cash, and we landed this huge customer that was like 70 or 80% of our revenue. And they were about to expand, which was going to allow us to actually invest in our platform. Or if we didn't, we were going to go out of business. And one day they said, we're going to put you in all of our hospitals. So it was going to take us from a couple 100,000 revenue to a couple million. And it was going to change everything for us. And then that night, our software failed on them. And it impacted one hospital and one patient at that hospital in a non-serious way. And nobody knew except for us. And we knew that if we told them, they would cancel the rollout, tell other people, and the company would fold up, and I'd be screwed financially, and my employees would be looking for jobs, and we wouldn't make the dent in the universe that we wanted to. And I even had someone on my team that was encouraging me not to tell them and said, look, let's just fix the issue. It didn't hurt anybody. Let's just keep going. And for me, I didn't know how to be a CEO, but I knew how to be a recovering drug addict. And for me, practicing rigorous authenticity is not possible unless you use the other two principles. But just within that context, it meant no matter how large the stakes, no matter how small the stakes. And in that moment, I had to use my recovery, and I called up the customer. I told them about the failure, and instead of canceling our contract, it led to accelerated growth for the company because there was a level of trust that they had in us that they didn't have in any of their other vendors.
Okay, wait a
They
minute, wait a minute,
laughed
wait.
when we told them.
Yeah, exactly. You got to tell that part. So you
Yeah.
tell
So
her. You got to
okay,
slow
you're
it
right.
down, and you got to tell that part.
Sorry. I'm literally like shaking, right? And I'm calling, and I'm basically signing my own death warrant as a founder of a company. And I call. Her name was Trish, and I call Trish, and I'm like, hey, we have a problem. And I tell her about how we had impacted one patient at one hospital. And I get done explaining everything that happened, and there's this long pause. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is really bad. Like, did we do something illegal? Like, what's going to happen here? And then all of a sudden she just starts laughing, and like, not just like a chuckle, but hysterical laughter. And I was just sitting there for a minute with my future in the balance with her just laughing. And she finally stops laughing. I'm like, Trish, what are you laughing about? And she says, I know all of my other partners have this happen. None of them actually tell us. Like, when this happens, it's because when someone actually calls us, it's because 20,000 patients have been impacted. And you're calling me over one? I was like, yes, that's what we're supposed to do. And she said, God. And I'm like, I don't know how to interpret that. I'm like, so what does this mean for our rollout? She's like, heck, we're going faster now. I know I can trust you. This was a great moment in our relationship. And I literally thought that I was going to be shutting down the entire company in that moment. And I can't even tell you how many moments since then I've had similar stakes where I've had to take the mask off in moments where I was advised not to. And I'm not saying every time it worked out, but in the full body of life, it has worked out 100 times over, because in my experience, 99% of the worst things that ever happened to us happen only in our head.
Yeah, and even if you practice that authenticity and you lose the client or you lose the sale or whatever, you're going to look back on that and you're going to be very comfortable with it because you didn't hide anything. I mean, it is, we live in a society today, the mass thing, however you want to go at it. But this whole concept, I just want to slow it down a little bit to hear what else you have to say, but to kind of tee up, if you have some additional comments, this whole thing of being candid when you can hide it is huge. Because and if you talk about, now tell me your experience, this may relate to it, but my experience with Gen Y and Gen Z, okay, all right, all these young
Yep.
people, is one of the biggest things they have is just like, hey, I don't believe the guy.
Yep.
Okay, I mean, why did Ron Paul, when he ran for president, didn't he get like 20% of the vote? But I mean, and same thing when Ross Perot ran. Okay, I don't think people totally agreed with either guy, but they were like, hey, somebody's being honest.
Yep.
I'm going with that, you know?
Yep.
And we just don't see it. And as a CEO, you are so tempted. And you were tempted not only just with, I don't actually, I don't think you were really tempted by pride as most CEOs would be. What happens to my reputation?
Mm. Yeah,
Okay.
no.
I don't think that was a piece of it. I mean, you thought of your credit card companies and what they were going to, pester you or
Yeah.
whatever. And you thought of your family and whatever. But you have all these temptations to say, no, we're not going to live by what we believe in because that'll be too painful.
I think that the most significant competitive advantage available to every leader is right under their nose and they don't know it. I genuinely believe that what you just talked about, being able to push through that moment and be vulnerable and authentic in the moments, not where it's convenient and safe, but where it's not, are the greatest opportunities for us to thrive and succeed as leaders. And I think that right now we're looking at it the same way we did the dot-com boom. It's whoever gets there first. And for me, for the work that I do, I have an assessment where it's a mask assessment, and we assess like 500 to 700 leaders, CEOs. We work with Google and Dell, like big Fortune 50, and also like startups and stay-at-home freelancers and entrepreneurs. And all of them are wearing masks. 90% report wearing masks at work. And that's just because that's a leadership model that we inherited, and it did work for a period of time. But as I touched on at the beginning of this podcast, it no longer gives you the advantage it used to. And so we're sitting here looking at a greenfield. And so for me, for what I'm doing, one of the reasons that what I am doing right now is going to be successful is I'm doing what's known as a personal brand, which I don't really love because it feels egoic, and that's not really my cup of tea. But I'm doing it anyhow to carry my message. And one of the things that I do that scares the crap out of my team is when I do things like what I did on this podcast, where I told you I was scared. Because when you look at self-help motivational speakers and people that are on a mission, they'll tell you all the things that you need to do to fix yourself. But Tony Robbins doesn't get up there and talk about what he needs to work through, right? He's willing to have 5,000 people that he'll help, but he's not going to work through what he's going through. And my team, they were so scared. They were like, you need to be the expert. And I'm like, I am. I'm a sponsor. I'm not a CEO. I'm an expert in using this process. And the only way I can teach them is by showing them how I use it myself. And so one of our goals is to be the first mask-free brand in the history of the world. And it scares the crap out of my team on a daily basis. And so if they're on my team, right, I pay them, they believe in what we're doing, they believe in my message, and they're scared. Imagine how terrified most people are. But if you step out and you actually take that risk, you may lose a battle, but you're not going to lose the war, because people are dying for it. And especially the younger generations, they are dying for it. So I
Totally.
think you're right.
Yeah, I
have
totally
no
agree.
thoughts on the topic whatsoever.
Yeah.
Slightly passionate.
But we look at this ship, the United States of America, which is listing tragically to the side. The only way we're going to get this ship turned around is by doing exactly what you're saying. I mean, it is a critical piece of the puzzle. So, okay, you nailed that one. All right, Michael, what do you got on the second one? Let's hit the second out of the
surrender the outcome. This one is, when I do my workshops and my speaking, this is the hardest one for everybody. So it literally means letting go of the result. And that's what leaders are responsible for. We are conditioned that we are supposed to manage towards the results. And so I think a lot of people intellectually somewhat understand, okay, well, I need to let go because I can't fully make sure that all the outcomes happen. But then they sit there and they hit refresh on like a report that they're looking at every 5 minutes because they're trying to control something that's uncontrollable. They think they can make the customer buy, they can make the employee do X, they can make all these things happen. They stay up late at night worrying about all these balls in the air. And we're obsessed with trying to control the uncontrollable. And as recovering addicts, what we do in meetings is we practice surrendering the outcome. And because you know what, as a recovering addict, I had to be rigorously authentic that I'm an addict. I had to surrender that fact, and then I had to focus on what my uncomfortable work was. And so the way that you can surrender the outcome, the way you can let go of things that you can't control, is by literally writing a list where on the left-hand side you have can't, and on the right-hand side you have can, and you write down things that you can't control on the left, and you write down the things that you can control on the right, and then you exclusively focus on the can control bucket. Intellectually, we all understand that there are things that we can't control and things that we can. The salesperson that really is upset about their quota, because there's only one of those in this world, who wants to argue about their quota and it's never going to change, who wants to argue about how it's not fair, versus the salesperson that's making more calls. I mean, we can the manager that just wishes that their team would act the way that they should, and then meanwhile they're not performance managing or setting right expectations. The list could go on and on and on, but we waste 50% of our energy directionally on focusing on things that we can't control at the expense of the things that we can. And that is how you surrender. That's how you let go. We have a saying in recovery: you surrender to win. And I think it's so counterintuitive to a leader to actually go up and say, I have no control. I can't guarantee we're going to hit that number. I have no control over it. Oh, what are you admitting defeat? Do you suck? Do you have no confidence, Larry? Like, I mean, you get all that kind of stuff. Like, no, you know what? I can control the calls I make. I can control the training I give my people. I can control the value proposition. I can control all that stuff, but I can't control the customer. I can't control this. And I find that I actually upset people quite a bit. I come off as really abrasive because I exclusively focus on what I can control. And they're so used to people focusing on what they can't control that they think that we can actually control everything. I'm like, no, I already surrendered it. The second you said you can't make sure my book is a bestseller, I let that go. Cool. Now I'm focused on what I can't control. And just like, let's tick down the list. And that's something that I think we teach as leaders, but I don't really know that we teach it to ourselves and we practice it as much as we really could.
I think that's great, and it strikes me as correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I'm hearing possibly in what you're saying is that one of the things that trips people up with the results side is that they're focused on near-term results, almost tactically tactical, and they're letting go of their overall strategy. So your
Yep.
overall strategy, for instance, I want to be authentic. I want to be truthful. We want to be honest in all that we do. Well, wait a minute. Then if we are, we're going to lose this initial sale right here. And I
Right.
don't make this week or this month's numbers, or we're going to go in trouble or whatever it is. And you lose the long-term perspective and don't, you let that go.
Well,
Right.
you see a lot of examples of companies that have values and morals, but they get their backs up against the wall and they have to make a decision, and they end up making the one that turns in the results this week, this month, this quarter. I think it's human nature. I think that if we don't believe that living and leading mask free will make us more successful, then we won't do it. But you have to believe that it will. And so surrender for me has been an incredible tool because it separates me from most people. It allows I conserve a tremendous amount of energy compared to most of the people around me. People will, I mean, how many people are focused on going back to it just because it's fun on what political candidates are doing? You can't control them. Every minute that you spend focusing on what they're doing is a minute that you could spend with your child, that you could spend growing yourself, that you could spend meditating, that you could spend, hitting your goal, whatever it is. Every minute that you spend, the family member that isn't doing the things that you want, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. There's so many things. We're control freaks, and unfortunately, the telephone and the internet have given us the ability to create the illusion of control over all things. And as a result, we like to live in that arena. And then, so to me, what I say for anybody, if you learn how to surrender the outcome, you can actually differentiate yourself even more today than you could in a time when people weren't so obsessed with controlling the world around them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then also in living these three principles out, the other thing that I'd like to mention that you're alluding to is that when you slip, it starts small.
Yep.
I mean, you look at who was the big guy with the Ponzi scheme with the mutual fund
Bernie
in New York.
Madoff.
Yeah, you think of Madoff. You look at his history; it all started small,
Yep.
and it may have started just with Bernie or someone else, but but then it spread to the group because the leader's doing it, and then it spreads, and it becomes much worse and much worse and much worse. And so that's why you really got to hold your ground on the little stuff that you can hide, because
Yep.
Bernie was hiding, right?
Yep.
Amazingly effectively for too long. Okay, so you covered two. Let's hit on the third one here.
So uncomfortable work. It's the work that makes us physically uncomfortable, like literal physical. It's that pit in the middle of your stomach when you have to have a tough conversation. And the thing is that we talk so much about execution and strategy, but we don't talk enough about the human things that happen that actually hold those things back that nobody talks about. And that's literally the feelings in our stomach when we have to do something that's uncomfortable. So we're taught how to do smart work, that's intellectual. We're taught how to do physical work, that can be physical, or hard work, that's physical. But we're not taught how to do uncomfortable work, that's emotional. It's a completely different thought process on how to be successful. And I know you've probably seen this, but I see all the time someone doing 8 hours of hard work because they're avoiding 5 minutes of uncomfortable work. I remember when I was in corporate America, I didn't want to tell anyone that I didn't know how to use a pivot table. It made me uncomfortable because I thought that I would look weak in Microsoft Excel. So I spent 24 hours over a weekend trying to figure out how to use it. And I didn't know how to. And so then finally on Monday, I asked someone to show me. And in 10 minutes, they showed me. And so I fed it away 24 hours of time, not out of intelligence or I was doing a lot of hard work that weekend. It was hard work. But the uncomfortable work is a difference. And we're no strangers to uncomfortable work. Eat healthy, work out, meditate, don't use your phone around your kid. Like, we know all about uncomfortable work. And in my experience, there are two things that hold us back from doing uncomfortable work. It's a lack of clarity and it's a lack of energy. That's what the first two principles provide. When you're rigorously authentic, you get clear on what's true to you. And when you surrender the outcome, you get energy. And that's what allows you to go do the uncomfortable work.
Yeah, I mean it's being uncomfortable. It's the phrase where, well, it's just easier to do it myself than to train somebody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Because that
that's
because if you try to train somebody, you got fear that either you won't be successful as a trainer, they won't know it, or you don't know how to do that. And so that fear creates a sensation in your body. And so you go, I'll just do it. And then you're like wondering why you're working all night and weekends, and you've got an employee that's only working at 50%.
So the thing that also strikes me with this is that I run into a lot of leaders who are either nice people or sometimes they're even tough, but they will not hold a firm line with an employee. So they'll either let it go
Yep.
and they will not confront them, or they'll let it go and they'll nag them, but there's no real consequences, or they'll scream at them, but let them do it anyway. And it's this, it's the
Yep.
uncomfortable work, right?
Yeah. I mean, yes, that is happening everywhere all the time. And we're basically a bunch of organizations of people leading people who then lead their customers. And we either avoid difficult conversations or avoid growing in a way that will optimize the conversations that we have. And it comes back to a sensation in our body that has to do with the survival mechanism that kicks in that says, if you do this, you're going to be put at risk. But we're not trying to fight for fire and food and water, most of us anymore. Like Maslow's hierarchy, we're a little bit higher up in that hierarchy now. And now we're not really at risk of dying the same way that we were. We're at risk of feeling embarrassed. How much revenue is lost by companies across the world because somebody was scared of being embarrassed?
Oh, well, yeah. Or anyway, we could
Billions.
go down that path. And if you want to
Yeah.
stay in your political realm, we could talk about
No,
countries that have
no.
been damaged forever. So, but so I know we're running a little bit late here, but if you want to close with people, I mean, this has been great stuff. I want to make certain you give people your website again and your book title again, although we'll have that posted on the podcast page. But what is, a last transformational thought you want to leave people with, Michael? I think you really got some great stuff going here, and I hope people check it out.
Thank you. So, in my assessment that I've given to a ton of leaders, they approximate that they're spending 500 hours a year managing optics and managing their mask. And so, if you feel busy, if you feel suffocated, if you feel like you aren't maximizing your potential, you don't have the freedom, you're scared to say no to things when you could, you're scared to share your weakness, you're scared, you avoid difficult conversations, you're holding back your unique perspective when the boss is in the room. There is a way, a systematic way. I'm not talking about just hope or inspiration. There is a way that is step by step, the same way addicts use steps to get clean. You can learn a new way to live and lead by living and leading mask free. And you can go to michaelbrodywait.com, BRODY-WAITE, or just Michael Brody Waite without the hyphen. Either one goes to my website. And I have a system in my book called Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts. How to lead like your life depends on it. And it takes the entire system as you work through my 3 principles and you walk out with your mask-free minute. In 1 minute a day, you're able to gain that freedom and you're able to take off the mask bit by bit and really claim your unique voice in the world and become the leader that we sorely need.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for coming on the podcast, being with us. If we weren't tight on time, I could go on for another couple hours easy. So this is
Well,
great
I
stuff.
appreciate that. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.